There's a throwaway gag in Regular Show where Rigby leans back, full of himself, says nothing on Earth can stop them, and right on cue, a spacecraft drops out of the sky. That's the joke. The cheapest, dumbest one in the show. I've been watching this show for years, and I never gave it a second thought until I realized that 8 seasons later, the whole story really does come down to a thing falling from the sky to stop them. The show that looked the laziest was paying the most attention. So tonight, slowly, we follow that thread down. And here's the part that gets me. The very last episode shares its exact title with the very first one, both called The Power. An 8-year plan hiding inside a cartoon about avoiding work. Get comfortable, and if you want more of these, that subscribe button really helps. Welcome to Velvo. Let's start where it all starts. So before I take you down into the strange, sad machinery underneath this show, let me start where I started, with the version of Regular Show I thought I understood. The version most people remember. The version that for years I would have told you was a perfectly fine, perfectly disposable cartoon you put on while you ate cereal and waited for something better to come on. Because here's the thing I want to say slowly, the thing I keep circling back to, the claim that the cold open hung in the air and then just walked away from. Regular Show only looked lazy. That's it. That's the whole secret hiding in plain sight. It looked lazy. It wore laziness like a costume. It built its entire identity around 2 characters who refused to do anything, and it did that so convincingly that almost nobody noticed it was one of the most patient, most carefully assembled shows on television. And I need you to sit with how strange that is, because laziness is the last thing you'd expect to be a disguise. Most shows that want to be taken seriously announce it. They get self-important, they put on the dramatic music and the slow motion, and they tell you, right up front, this matters, please respect this. Regular Show did the exact opposite. It told you over and over in every frame, this does not matter. We are 2 idiots avoiding a task. Nothing here is important. And it said that for so long and so consistently that by the time it started quietly proving itself wrong, you'd already let your guard all the way down. Read this way, the laziness wasn't a flaw the show was apologizing for. The laziness was the trap. And I want to be careful with that word lazy because there are 2 completely different things hiding inside it. And the whole show lives in the gap between them. There's lazy as in the people are lazy, the characters, the 2 guys on the couch who won't get up. That part is real, that part is true, that part is the entire engine of the comedy. And then there's lazy as in the show is lazy, the writing, the craft, the making of the thing. And that second kind, the one that everybody, including me, just assumed came bundled with the first kind, that one was never true. Not once. The show was about laziness the way a heist movie is about a robbery. Being about a robbery doesn't make the movie sloppy. If anything, it makes it tighter, because you have to plan every beat. Regular Show was a tightly planned thing pretending to be a loose, dumb, slacker thing, and the pretending was so good that the pretending became the brand. People literally used it as background noise. They put it on to fall asleep to, which, when you think about where we both are right now, is a joke the show would have absolutely loved. Let me lay out the surface for you, the part everyone holds on to, in case you're hearing this half asleep and you need the map drawn slow. Regular Show is about 2 groundskeepers at a park. That's the premise. 2 guys whose entire job is to mow the lawn, rake the leaves, set up the chairs, clean the snack bar, and whose entire personality, their whole reason for existing, is finding any possible way to not do that. One of them is Mordecai. He's a blue jay, 6 feet tall, 23 years old, voiced by the guy who made the whole show, J.G. Quintel. Mordecai is the slightly more responsible one, which in this universe is a very low bar, the one who occasionally feels a flicker of guilt, who wants the girl who half-heartedly suggests they maybe should do the work before immediately agreeing not to. And the other one is Rigby. Rigby's a raccoon, smaller, scrappier, voiced by William Salyers, and he's the engine of bad decisions. If Mordecai is the part of you that knows you should get up off the couch, Rigby is the part of you that says, or, hear me out, what if we didn't? That's the dynamic. That's the whole show, on paper. 2 friends in their 20s, stuck in a dead-end job, dodging responsibility, getting into trouble, and the trouble usually escalates in this very specific Regular Show way, where a tiny domestic chore spirals out into something cosmic. They don't want to return a videotape, so a deal with a wizard happens. They argue over a video game high score, so reality starts to bend. They break a coffee mug, and somehow that ends with the fate of the universe on the line. The mundane thing is always the seed, and the surreal thing is always the bloom. And for a long time, that just reads as a fun, comedic formula. Small problem, insane consequences, everybody learns nothing, roll credits, And I want to slow down on that spiral because it's the most recognizable thing the show does, and it's also where the disguise is the thickest. Picture the rhythm of a typical episode. It opens small. It opens so small it's almost nothing. Somebody has to do a core, somebody doesn't want to, somebody cuts a corner, takes a shortcut, makes one tiny dumb human decision to avoid 5 minutes of effort, and that single corner cut is the loose thread, and the episode just pulls on it, and pulls until a man comes out of the sky, or a building tears in half, or time stops, or some ancient grinning thing with too many teeth shows up to collect a debt nobody knew they'd signed for. The stakes go from a snack bar shift to the literal end of everything, often inside 11 minutes, and the show plays that escalation completely straight. Nobody in the episode stops to say, "Isn't this insane?" They just deal with it the way you deal with a flat tire, and then at the end, things mostly reset and the lawn still isn't mowed. Here's the part I missed for years though. That structure, the tiny thing becomes the end of the world structure, is not just a gag generator. It's a worldview. It's the show quietly telling you again and again that small choices have enormous consequences. That the dumb, ordinary, lazy decision you make on a Tuesday can crack the sky open. And what this suggests, when you watch the whole run with that in mind, is that the show was rehearsing its own ending from the very first episodes. It was practicing the move where something small and human turns out to carry the weight of the universe, over and over in disposable little comedy doses, so that when it finally did it for real, when it finally let a small human thing carry the actual weight of everything, the muscle was already built. You'd been trained to believe, in this world, that the little stuff is never just little. But a show like this lives or dies on the people around those two. So let me give you the rest of the park plainly, because you're going to need all of them later, and I don't want you lost. The man who runs the park, the one technically in charge of Mordecai and Rigby, is Benson. Benson is a gumball machine, a literal red gumball machine with arms and legs, voiced by Sam Marin, and his defining trait is that he is almost always yelling. He yells because his two employees never do anything, and honestly, watching the whole series, you come to understand Benson's blood pressure as the most reasonable thing in the entire universe. He is the only one acting like a person with a job. He's surrounded by chaos, and he just wants the lawn mowed, and nobody will mow the lawn. Above Benson, weirdly, is Pops Maillard. He's this gentle, soft old man with a head shaped like a lollipop, a perfect pink candy sphere, and he's the one who actually owns the park even though he is the least equipped person imaginable to own anything. Pops is sweetness incarnate. He's childlike, he's kind, he delights in tiny things, he gets confused by the modern world, and Sam Marin voices him too, which I'll come back to because it's quietly one of the most impressive things about this whole production. Then there's Skips. Skips is the silent strong one, a yeti, and the joke that becomes much more than a joke is that he's immortal. He's voiced by Mark Hamill, which is a sentence I love saying. Luke Skywalker plays the calm, immortal yeti who fixes everything and says almost nothing. When something goes truly wrong, when the cosmic stuff descends, Skips is the one who already knows what to do because Skips has lived long enough to have already seen it. And then you've got Muscle Man, whose real name is Mitch Sorenstein, a short green guy who is convinced he is the coolest person alive, and his inseparable best friend High Five Ghost, a small floating ghost with one raised hand permanently held up for a high five, also voiced by J.G. Quintel. So the creator is playing Mordecai and the ghost. Hold that thought too. And then just past the park, there's the coffee shop, the other world this show orbits, where Margaret works, the bird who becomes Mordecai's main love interest, and where Eileen works, a mole, a waitress who has a quiet, patient crush on Rigby and is voiced by Minty Lewis. That's your ensemble. That's the board. A yelling gumball machine, a candy-headed old man, an immortal yeti, two slackers, a green guy, a floating ghost, and two women at a coffee shop who deserve so much better than the two idiots they fall for. And I promised I'd come back to the voices, so let me, because it's one of those production details that tells you everything about how much care went into a show pretending not to care. Listen again to who's doing what. Sam Marin voices 3 of the main characters. 3. He's Benson, the furious red gumball machine. He's Pops, the gentle old lollipop man. And he's Muscle Man, the loud green guy. Stop and really hear that for a second, because those 3 are about as far apart as 3 characters can possibly be. One is pure rage, one is pure innocence, one is pure swagger. And they're all the same person. That's not a casting accident, that's range. That's an actor building 3 entirely separate human beings out of one throat. And then on the other side, you've got JG, Quintel, the man who created the whole thing, and he's not off in a writer's room being the auteur. He's in the booth voicing Mordecai, the lead, and also voicing High Five Ghost, this tiny background-feeling sidekick. The creator gave himself the star and a bit part. That's a person who loves the small corners of his own show as much as the center of it. None of that is what you do if you're phoning it in. You don't hand one actor a rageaholic and a sweetheart and a meathead and trust him to keep them straight unless everybody involved is paying very, very close attention. Now, the way you actually learn to love a show like this isn't through plot, it's through repetition. It's through the running gags, and Regular Show had a comedic fingerprint, a set of jokes that came back to so often that they stopped being jokes and started being a kind of language between the show and you. Muscle Man, for instance. Muscle Man has this catchphrase, this bit, where he sets up a joke by saying, "You know who else," and then names whatever's happening, and then the punchline is always, "My mom. You know who else needs to mow the lawn? My mom." It's the dumbest possible joke. It's a joke a 13-year-old would make. And the show runs it into the ground, on purpose hundreds of times. And the running into the ground is the point, because eventually the sheer commitment to a bad joke becomes its own kind of brilliant. Sorry, I have to stop for 1 second because I genuinely cannot tell you how many times I rolled my eyes at the "my mom" jokes when I first watched this, and how completely the show wore me down until I was the idiot grinning every single time. That's a real thing this show does to you. It out-stubborns you. Anyway, there's Benson's car, which early on becomes a running gag all its own, because his car keeps getting destroyed. Over and over, Mordecai and Rigby's nonsense keeps ending with Benson's car wrecked, totaled, flattened, blown up, and there's something almost ritualistic about it, the universe punishing this one responsible man through his vehicle. You start to flinch on his behalf, you see the car show up in an episode, and some animal part of your brain goes, "Oh no, not again. That car is not going to survive this." And there's Pops, Sweet Pops, who has this recurring habit of becoming convinced that it's his birthday when it absolutely is not, and the way he lights up the pure innocent joy of a man who just really wants it to be his birthday, it's so small and it's so them. It's a tiny window into who Pops is, this person so gentle and so hopeful that he keeps reaching for the happiest day of the year on days it simply isn't. And then there's the Christmas one, which I love, where every single character takes a shot at Benson's ugly Christmas sweater. Everyone disses the sweater. Even Santa. Even Santa Claus shows up and insults Benson's sweater. The one day of the year that's supposed to be about kindness, and the universe still finds a way to gang up on poor Benson. And again, on the surface, these are just jokes. Just dumb, warm, recurring jokes. But here's where I want to start turning the lights on, slowly, because this is the engine of the whole thing, the reason we're spending 2 hours together on this. Underneath all that goofing around, the show was keeping score. It was keeping score the entire time. Every gag, every throwaway character, every silly rule it established about its own world, the show was writing it all down, quietly, in a ledger, and it was going to come back and collect. And what this suggests, the more you watch, is that the smartest moments in Regular Show were never the clever one-liners. They were never a sharp comeback or a witty bit of dialogue. The smartest moments are setups that the show plants and then just leaves there, walks away from, lets you forget about entirely. And then, sometimes years later, in a completely different season, it pays them off and the payoff lands like a truck, because you'd stopped watching for it. That's the real claim I'm building toward across everything we're going to talk about. The cleverness of this show is structural, not verbal. It's architectural. The jokes you think are just jokes are load-bearing. And read this way, all that repetition I just described, the "my mom" jokes, the destroyed cars, the fake birthdays, the sweater, all of it functions as a kind of trust exercise. The show is teaching you its own rhythms. It's training you on what to expect. It's saying, here's how I behave, here's the kind of thing I do, you can count on me to be this dumb and this safe. And it spends years building that trust for one reason, so that later, when it wants to, it can break the rhythm on purpose. It can take a pattern you've laughed at 50 times and turn it mid-laugh into something that stops your breath. You can't break a rule the audience doesn't know. So first, patiently, lovingly, the show taught you all its rules. And before I take you any deeper into how that machine actually works, I just want to say, if you find yourself getting pulled in by this, if the idea that a dumb little show was secretly building something enormous is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night the way it keeps me up, subscribing genuinely helps me keep making these long, slow walks through the shows worth walking through. And I'd love to have you along for the rest of it. That's all. Back to the park. So let me give you the 2 posts that hold this entire video up, because once you see them, you can't unsee them. Regular Show ran for 8 seasons. It premiered on Cartoon Network on September 6, 2010, And the very first episode, Season 1, Episode 1, The Place It All Begins, is called The Power. And then 261 episodes later, 8 seasons later, the show ends. The series finale aired on January 16th, 2017. So you've got these 2 points, more than 6 years apart, 261 episodes apart, the absolute beginning and the absolute end. And here's the detail I want to plant in your head and just let sit there, glowing, until we get to it properly. Those 2 episodes, the first one and the last one, share a name. The premiere and the finale are connected by a title. The show, in its very first breath, named something, and then in its very last breath, named it again. I'm not going to spoil what that means yet. I'm not going to tell you how it pays off, because the payoff is one of the places this whole video is walking toward, and it deserves room. But just hold it. The first episode and the last episode, 8 seasons of distance between them, and they're reaching across all of it to touch hands. A show about 2 guys who couldn't be bothered to do their jobs spent 8 years setting up a rhyme between its opening note and its closing note. That is not what lazy shows do. Lazy shows don't remember their own pilot. Lazy shows don't build a door in Season 1 and quietly carry the key all the way to the end of Season 8. And the fact that this one did, that's the first hard piece of evidence that the dumbness was always a performance. And think about what that actually demands practically behind the scenes. 261 episodes is a lot of television. That's 8 years of a writer's room turning over, of voice sessions, of deadlines, of the ordinary grind of making a thing week after week after week. For the very first episode and the very last episode to rhyme, somebody had to remember, somebody had to hold that thread across all of it. Across all those seasons where the show looked to the rest of us like it was just goofing around with wizards and high scores and videotapes. The whole time, the thread was being carried. Suggest it to yourself this way. The smartest moments of this show, the ones the title of what we're doing here is pointing at, were never moments of wit. They were moments of patience. The cleverness isn't a line somebody wrote that made you laugh. The cleverness is a decision somebody made in year 1 and protected, quietly, for 6 more years until it could pay off. That's a different kind of intelligence than most comedy ever even attempts. It's the intelligence of the long game. Let me give you the second piece, because this one isn't an interpretation, this one's a matter of public record and it happened way earlier than you'd think. In 2012, Regular Show won a Primetime Emmy. A real one, the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Short-Format Animation, and it won it for an episode from its 3rd season called Eggcellent, which aired on February 27, 2012. Sit with the timing of that. 3rd season, the show is barely 2 years old. It is still, to most of the people flipping past it, that weird cartoon about the raccoon and the bird, the serial show, the background noise. And meanwhile, the actual television industry, the people who hand out the same trophies they give to prestige dramas, had already looked at this thing and gone, no wait, this one's special. The grown-ups in the room noticed before the rest of us did. The fans, a lot of us, came to it late, came to it years later going, oh no, this was always good. The Emmy was sitting there the entire time, since season 3, basically saying, told you so. I want to be honest about something here, an aside, because I think it matters. I was one of the people who didn't notice. I genuinely was. For years, I filed this show under harmless and forgettable, and finding out it had a Primetime Emmy by its 3rd season was the thing that made me go back and actually look. And looking is how all of this started. So if you've ever underestimated something, some show, some person, some quiet thing that turned out to be running far deeper than you gave it credit for, you already understand the emotional shape of what we're doing here. Okay, back into it. So that's the case, laid out as plainly as I can lay it. A show that dressed up as the laziest thing on television. An ensemble of lovable weirdos, a gumball machine, and a Candyman, and an immortal Yeti, and a ghost with a permanent high five. A handful of jokes about somebody's mom, and a busted car, and a fake birthday, and an ugly sweater. And underneath all of it, completely hidden, a machine keeping perfect score, planting setups, holding keys, building a rhyme between its first word and its last word across 261 episodes, and quietly collecting an Emmy in season 3, while the rest of us weren't paying attention. The cleverness was never in the punchlines, it was in the patience. And here's where I want to tell you what this video actually is, what the shape of the next couple of hours is going to feel like, so you know where we're headed even as you drift. We're going to start gentle. We're going to start with the stuff everyone remembers and loves, the jokes, the warmth, the easy comfort watch texture of it all, and then, slowly, episode by episode, season by season, we're going to walk somewhere much stranger and a lot sadder than where we began. Because this show, the one about the 2 guys who wouldn't mow the lawn, ends up being about good and evil, and about growing up whether you want to or not, and about mortality, and about sacrifice. It ends, and I mean this very literally, somewhere you would never in 1,000 years have predicted from that goofy pilot. It ends with an old man and a son and a VHS tape. And by the time we get there, I want you to feel the full weight of how far we traveled from two slackers on a couch. But we don't start at the sad end. We start with the warm middle. Because before this show ever broke your heart, it spent years building a love story it claimed again and again it never even meant to tell. And that's where I want to take you next. And the first sign that this show was quietly breaking its own rules came from the last place you'd look for ambition. A love story it technically wasn't allowed to tell. Because here's the thing about how this show got made. When JG, Quintel was setting it up, Cartoon Network asked him for standalone episodes. No serialization, no long arcs, every episode self-contained, a closed loop, the kind of thing you could air in any order on any afternoon, and a kid flipping channels would never feel lost. And on paper, that makes total sense for the genre. That's the whole comfort of a show like this. You drop in anywhere. The park is the park, the guys are the guys, the toll is paid, the lesson is half learned, roll credits, nothing carries over, nothing has weight that lasts past the last frame. And Quintel basically said sure, and then didn't quite do it, because tucked inside all those self-contained episodes, he started building one thread that refused to stay self-contained. Mordecai and Margaret, the will they won't they that ran underneath the whole early run of the show like a second engine nobody was supposed to notice. Now, if you've never seen it, let me set the scene because this is the part that's easy to underrate. Margaret works at the coffee shop. That's where she lives in the geography of the show. She's the reason Mordecai suddenly develops opinions about coffee, the reason a blue jay who cannot be bothered to rake a single leaf will find 11 excuses a day to walk into that one specific building. She's his primary love interest for years. And the running joke, is that Mordecai is hopeless. He gets one good sentence out and then says 4 terrible ones. He plans the perfect move and then faceplants directly into it. It's comedy. It plays as comedy every single time. But watch what's actually happening underneath the comedy. The situation is changing. Slowly, episode by episode, the relationship is inching somewhere. And that's the part the format wasn't supposed to allow. A gag can reset. A gag is built to reset. That's what makes it a gag. You can tell the same joke about Mordecai choking in front of Margaret 100 times, and it costs you nothing because the next episode he's back to 0. No harm done. Except the show kept letting it cost something. It kept letting the needle move. I love this honestly because it's so sneaky. It's a love story hiding inside a joke about a guy who can't tell a love story. And read this way, that romance starts to look less like a subplot and more like a secret thesis statement. Because the whole unspoken rule of this kind of cartoon is that the characters don't really change. They can't. If they changed, you couldn't air the episodes out of order, and the network wanted the episodes airable out of order. So the format itself is basically a promise that nobody grows up, nobody gets together, nothing is ever different on Friday than it was on Monday. And here's Quintel, very quietly building one relationship that breaks that promise. What this suggests is that from very early on, somebody in that writer's room believed these characters were allowed to change, even when the rules said they shouldn't, even when the show was officially a machine for staying exactly the same. Let me give you the 2 episodes that make this click, because the show actually shows you both halves of the trick, the reset and the thing that won't reset. First, the reset, there's an episode called Bad Kiss from season 3, and the whole engine of it is Mordecai finally on the edge of the moment. The moment, the one he's been flubbing for years, is right there, lined up, about to happen. And it gets ruined. Not by some cosmic monster, not by a portal, not by a giant hand reaching out of the sky, which, fair warning, is the kind of thing that does ruin moments on this show later. It gets ruined by a chili dog. Bad breath, he ate the wrong thing at the wrong time, and the kiss gets cut short over something that's stupid. And that is pure classic format. That's the joke doing its job. The universe yanks the moment away at the last second. Status quo protected, needle snapped back towards 0. It's the show keeping its promise to never let anything actually land. Okay, now hold that next to Meteor Moves. Meteor Moves is season 4, and it's the breakthrough, because in that episode, the moment doesn't get yanked away. There's no chili dog, there's no last-second cosmic prank. They're up watching a meteor shower, the sky doing its slow, quiet thing overhead, and Mordecai and Margaret actually kiss. A real one, a passionate one, the thing the show had been dangling and then snatching back for years, and this time it lets it happen, and it lets it stay. And the way the episode frames it is almost too perfect, because the running gag was always that Mordecai was stuck in the friend zone, and this episode treats the friend zone like an actual place you can physically escape. He literally breaks out of it. The metaphor becomes a location, and then he leaves it. That's the show winking at you and telling the truth at the same time. And I want to sit on this for a second, because here's the quiet, sneaky, clever part. Bad Kiss and Meteor Moves are doing the exact same job. They're both about whether the moment is allowed to happen. One says no and resets you with a joke. The other says yes and lets it stick. Comedy and continuity, the two things people think are opposites, the funny thing and the serious thing, turning out to be the same tool pointed in two different directions. The chili dog and the kiss are both answers to the same question. Does anything on the show get to be permanent? And with Meteor Moves, for the first time, the answer is yes. That little yes is the seed of everything. Frame it this way. You've got a creator who was handed a rule, no serialization, all standalone, keep it weightless, and instead of obeying it head-on, he smuggled in one slow-burning romance that absolutely depended on episodes remembering the ones before them. The romance is the Trojan horse. It's the thing that looked harmless enough, looked like just another subplot in a goofy show about two guys avoiding work, that quietly carried serialization in through the front gate of a show that was forbidden from having any. You can't do a years-long will they won't they without continuity. It's structurally impossible. The slow burn is continuity. So every time the show advanced, Mordecai and Margaret even an inch, it was secretly proving it could carry a long story. It was practicing. And what this points to, read generously, is a first domino. The moment Quintel decided to sneak an arc past the network might just be the origin point of everything serialized that comes later. The whole thing, the first piece to fall. Every multi-part finale, every callback that pays off 3 seasons down the line, every moment where the dumb show suddenly remembers it has a memory, none of that happens if somebody didn't first prove, with a blue jay and a robin and a coffee shop, that this format could hold a thread without snapping it. The love story taught the show how to have a future. And that's the part I find genuinely warm about it. The most ambitious structural decision this show ever made didn't announce itself. It didn't come dressed as the cosmic stuff. No portals, no monsters, no end of the universe. It came dressed as two friends who couldn't figure out how to say the obvious thing to each other, taking years to get there, fumbling it over coffee, while the network sat there thinking it was watching a tidy little series that reset every week. The biggest swing was the quietest one. Nobody clocked it because it looked like the softest thing on the show. So if the romance was the show quietly teaching itself that things could carry over, that change was allowed, that a moment could be permanent instead of a punchline, then the obvious next question is when it stopped whispering that and started saying it out loud. Which brings us to Season 3, the stretch where the dumb shows stopped being dumb. Because somewhere around its 3rd season, this show made a decision that almost no comedy of its kind ever makes. It decided to remember. And I don't mean it got a little more ambitious, or it added 1 or 2 callbacks for the fans who've been paying attention. I mean it made a structural choice, a real one, the kind you can point at on a calendar, and once it made that choice, it never went back. Season 3 premiered on September 19th, 2011. And that's the date I want you to mark, because that's the moment the show stopped behaving like the thing everybody thought it was. Up until then, regular show had been living inside the comfortable rules of the genre it pretended to belong to. Episodes were self-contained. Whatever insane cosmic nonsense happened to Mordecai and Rigby on a Monday, by Tuesday it was gone, wiped clean, never mentioned. Because that's the deal you make with a cartoon like this. Nothing carries over. Nothing accumulates. The reset button is sacred. And then Season 3 arrived, and the show, very quietly, with no announcement and no fanfare, took its thumb off the reset button and just left it off. Starting with Season 3, the show deliberately shifted toward character, backstories, toward continuity, toward serialization. Past storylines got continued, they got referenced, things that happened started staying happened. And I want to slow all the way down here because this is the structural heart of everything we're talking about in the first half of this video, and it's so easy to walk right past it. We are trained as people who watch cartoons to expect amnesia. We expect the world to forget, so when a show like this starts to remember, it doesn't feel like a big dramatic swing in the moment. It feels like nothing. It feels like a tiny continuity detail you might not even clock the first time. But read this way, Season 3 is the show's quiet declaration of intent. It's the moment regular show decided, somewhere behind the curtain, that actions in this world would have memory. That a thing you did in one episode could reach forward and touch you in another, that's not a comedy decision. That's a novel's decision. That's the decision a show makes when it secretly knows it's building towards something it can't get to one disposable episode at a time. And here's the cleanest way I can show you the machinery, the single clearest example of long-range continuity the show ever pulled off, because it spans not just episodes but seasons, and it's built around the most ordinary object imaginable. So, Margaret. We talked about Margaret already, the bird from the coffee shop, Mordecai's whole reason for getting out of bed for years. There's an episode called Stake Me Amadeus. It's from season 4, it aired on August 12, 2013, and in it, the show does something that for a comedy of this kind is almost reckless. It establishes that Margaret is leaving, she got into college, she's going, and Mordecai, being Mordecai, ends up trying to give her a ride to the airport, which is exactly the kind of small, aching, painfully human errand the show learned to build its biggest moments around. A guy driving the girl he loves to the airport so she can leave for a future he's not part of. That's the episode. And in a normal cartoon, in the version of this show everyone thought they were watching, that would be the end of it. Margaret leaves, the credits roll, and next week she's just gone, never spoken of again. Because that's how these shows handle a character exit. They don't grieve, they just quietly stop drawing you. But that's not what happens, and this is the part that, the first time I really noticed it, genuinely made me sit up. The very next season premiere, the episode that opens season 5, is called Laundry Woes. It aired on September 2nd, 2013, and it opens with Mordecai finding Margaret's sweater, an old sweater she left behind, and he spends the episode trying to return it. Let that land for a second. A breakup, an exit, a goodbye at an airport, and the show does not forget it by the next episode. Instead, it opens the next whole season with the emotional aftershock of it, with a man holding a piece of cloth that belongs to someone who's gone, trying to find a way to give it back to a life that's already moved on without him. I have to stop because I think that's quietly one of the most beautiful small ideas this show ever had, and almost nobody talks about it. A sweater. They built a season premiere around a sweater. And frame that sweater the way I've come to frame it because I think it's the perfect emblem of the show's new rules. It's an object that carries grief forward instead of resetting it. In the old version of this show, in the Amnesia version, there is no sweater because there's nothing for the sweater to mean. You can only have an object that aches if the thing that made it ache is allowed to have happened and to keep having happened across the scene between two seasons. The sweater only works because the show now keeps score. It's the show holding up a physical thing and going, see, this is real, this stayed, the person who wore this was here and now she isn't, and that absence has weight and we are not going to pretend otherwise. That's the whole serialization thesis compressed into one prop. A breakup that doesn't get forgotten by the next episode. A goodbye that leaves a mark on the furniture of the world. Now, you could look at that and say, okay, that's one storyline, that's one romance the show decided to take seriously. That's the exception, and that's exactly the assumption. They become the engine. They become the proof that serialization wasn't a one-time experiment, it was the new way the whole machine ran. And the cleanest evidence for that is what the show does next, which is build an entire second romantic arc on the bones of the first one. Because there's a character named CJ. CJ debuts in an episode called Yes Dude Yes, Season 3, Episode 25, which aired on May 7th, 2012. And here's the thing about how she enters. She doesn't enter as a love interest, she enters as an antagonist. A female antagonist, somebody the show sets up in opposition, and then, over time, patiently, she becomes Mordecai's next major love interest, the series' second major romantic storyline. And I need you to see what that actually means structurally, because it's wild for a show like this. It means that while one romance was still unfolding, the show was already laying the groundwork for the one that would come after it. It means CJ wasn't a replacement they scrambled to invent once Margaret left. She was planted earlier, seeded as an antagonist, allowed to grow, and then promoted into the emotional center of the show's second great love story. That's not how a show that lives episode to episode operates. That's how a show with a plan operates. A show that's thinking in years. By the time you get here, the show isn't just remembering its past, it's preloading its future. Building a whole second arc in the negative space of the first one, so that when the first romance finally closes, there's already another one standing there, fully grown, with roots that go back seasons. And I want to take a breath here, because if you're the kind of person who finds this stuff as quietly thrilling as I do, this slow realization that a dumb cartoon was running long game architecture under your nose the whole time, then sticking around and subscribing genuinely means a lot to me, because these long, careful walks through shows that earned a closer look are exactly the thing I want to keep making. And I'd love to keep making them with you here. Okay, back to the love triangle, because it's about to detonate. So now the show has two romances live at once, which means it has a problem, the good kind, the kind a serialized show gets to actually solve. It has a love triangle. And here's where you really watch the machine show its teeth, because there's an episode called Merry Christmas Mordecai. It's season 6, episode 10. It aired on December 4th, 2014, and in it, Mordecai kisses Margaret. In front of CJ, let me describe that for you because if you're half asleep, I want you to feel the shape of it even if you've never seen the frame. You've got the new relationship, the one the show spent seasons quietly building, and you've got the old one, the one that supposedly ended the ghost of the airport in the sweater. And in one impulsive, terrible, deeply human moment, the past comes crashing into the present, and Mordecai kisses the person he used to love right in front of the person he's with now. It causes a breakup, a temporary one, and it forces the show to actually resolve the love triangle across the episodes that come after it. And that phrase, across the episodes that come after it, that's the whole point. That's the thing I keep dragging you back to. Because in the old Amnesia version of this show, you cannot do this. A kiss in front of the wrong person in an Amnesia cartoon has no consequences because there's no next episode for the consequences to live in. The slate wipes, but this show can't wipe the slate anymore. It gave that up back in season 3. And so now it's stuck in the best possible way with the wreckage of what Mordecai just did. It has to deal with it. It has to carry the hurt forward and the awkwardness and the question of who he actually wants, episode after episode, until it earns its way back to some kind of resolution. The show built itself a problem it could not solve in 22 minutes, and that's only possible because it spent years teaching itself and us that this world keeps a ledger. Which brings me to the episode where the show cashes a whole stack of that ledger out at once. And honestly, it's one of the most quietly audacious things it ever does. It's called Dumped at the Altar. It's the season 6 finale, season 6, episode 28. It aired on June 25th, 2015, and it pays off years of romance simultaneously. Because in this one episode, 2 things happen, and they happen on top of each other. And the collision is the entire point. The first thing is that Mordecai and Margaret finally, definitively break up. Not a temporary thing this time. The real one. The end of the love story that the entire series in a way had been orbiting since almost the beginning. Years of will they, years of near misses and bad timing. And that sweater, all of it resolving. And not resolving the way the fairy tale would want. They break up. That's the answer the show was building toward all along. And it had the nerve to make the answer a goodbye. But that's only half of what's in Dumped at the Altar, and this is where I genuinely want you to feel how much this show is juggling, because in the same episode, Muscle Man marries Starla, the wedding and the breakup in the same 22 minutes. One love story ending and another one being sealed at the same altar. And the title, Dumped at the Altar, it's pulling double duty. It's holding both of those things in one phrase, the dumping and the altar, the heartbreak and the wedding, side by side. I have to be honest, the first time I really registered that the same episode contained both Mordecai's biggest romantic ending and Muscle Man's biggest romantic beginning, I was kind of stunned the show kept all of that in the air at once and made it feel earned. That's a finale doing the work of 2 finales. And here's the part that for me completely closes the case on serialization being the engine and not the exception. Because Muscle Man's wedding is itself the payoff of a buried multi-season arc that almost nobody was tracking. Muscle Man, the green guy, the my mom guy, the one whose entire function for years looked like dumb comic relief, his relationship with Starla is its own quietly enormous story, and the roots of it go back so far it's almost funny. Starla was introduced way back in an episode called Muscle Woman. That's season 2, episode 14. It aired on April 4th, 2011, before the big season 3 turn even fully happened. And in that very episode, Muscle Man and Starla broke up. They broke up over emotional distance. That's the first thing we ever learn about them as a couple, that they had something and it fell apart because he couldn't close the gap between them. And by the way, Muscle Woman is also the episode that reveals Muscle Man's real name, Mitchell Sorenstein, which tells you something on its own, that the show was already in season 2, treating this clown like a person with a real name and a real history and a real heartbreak. And then the show just waits for seasons. It reunites them later in the back half of the series, and then it marries them at the altar and Dumped at the Altar. So follow that thread the whole way. Introduced and broken up in season 2, apart for years. Reunited seasons later, married at the very end of season 6. The show tracked a side character's love life for roughly 5 years. 5 years of real time, of a supporting player's romance, planted early, abandoned, quietly nursed back, and then paid off in a wedding that shares a frame with the lead character's breakup. And it did all of that while we were laughing at the my mom jokes. That's the move. That's the whole disguise working exactly as designed. The character you took least seriously was carrying one of the longest emotional arcs in the entire show, and you didn't notice because he kept telling you about his mom. And I'd argue, sitting with all of this, that the romances were never really about romance. Not deep down. Read them as the training wheels for consequence. Every one of these love stories, Mordecai and Margaret, Mordecai and CJ, the Triangle, Muscle Man and Starla, what they're really doing, underneath the feelings, is teaching the audience a single lesson over and over in the gentlest possible way. They're teaching you that this world keeps a ledger, that things you do come back, that a kiss has a cost, that a goodbye leaves a sweater behind, that emotional distance can break a couple in season 2 and still be the thing they have to overcome to get married in season 6. The show used romance because romance is the easiest place to make an audience care about continuity. We already understand that love is supposed to have memory. So the show met us there, in the one kind of story where consequences feel natural, and it used those stories to quietly install the idea that everything here accumulates. And once you believe that, once the show has trained you to expect the world to remember, it can use that exact same machinery for things much heavier than who's dating who. But it isn't only the romances doing this, and I'd be cheating you if I made it sound like the serialization only lived in the love stories. It's in the quieter corners, too, in characters you'd never expect to have an arc at all. Take Benson. We met Benson already, the gumball machine, the boss, the human embodiment of high blood pressure, the guy whose entire deal at the start is yelling at Mordecai and Rigby for never doing their jobs. In the early going, Benson is basically a pure antagonist. He's the obstacle, he's the authority figure whose whole purpose is to be angry at our heroes. And then there's an episode called Benson Be Gone, Season 2, Episode 11, and something shifts after it. Benson starts to soften, slowly. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic turn, but across the seasons that follow, he drifts from being that pure angry antagonist into being something else entirely. A compassionate friend. Someone who actively helps his coworkers. Someone who by the later seasons you realize is not the obstacle at all. He's one of them, he's family. He's a guy who genuinely cares about these idiots and shows up for them. And I love this one specifically because of how hidden it is. Benson's whole arc of becoming a kinder person is tucked inside a yelling boss gag. On the surface, every Benson scene still reads like the same joke, the exasperated manager losing it at his useless employees. But if you actually watch the trajectory, if you line up early Benson against late Benson, you're looking at real character drift, a man genuinely growing more open and more caring over years. And the show buried that growth underneath a recurring comedic bit so smoothly that you can watch the entire series and only feel it rather than see it. That's character development hiding inside a punchline. That's the show keeping score on someone's heart while you thought it was just doing the angry boss routine again. And then there's the arc that matters most for where this whole story is heading. The one I think is the real emotional spine of the back half of the series, and that's Rigby. Rigby the raccoon, the engine of bad decisions, the one I told you earlier is the part of you that says, or hear me out, what if we didn't? Rigby starts the show as the single most immature character in it. He's the screw-up. He's the one who lies, who cheats at games, who runs from every responsibility, who makes everything worse, who would rather do literally anything than grow up. If you had to pick the character least likely to ever earn a real moment of maturity, it'd be him, easily, by a mile. And so, of course, the show makes his entire arc about exactly that, about growth, about maturation, about Rigby slowly, painfully, over years, becoming someone better than he started. And it culminates in something I genuinely did not see coming the first time, in Rigby's Graduation Day special. That's season 7, episodes 36 through 39. It aired on June 30th, 2016, and in it, the show's biggest screw-up, the raccoon who couldn't be trusted to do anything, stands up and gives an inspiring graduation speech. Sit with that for a second. The character who started the series as the embodiment of avoidance, of immaturity, of never doing the work, ends up being the one delivering the speech about having done the work, about having grown, about going forward. And I have to just say it plainly, that hit me, because it's the show collecting on the longest, most patient bet it ever placed. You don't get to that speech without years of tiny moments, years of small steps and backslides, years of the show quietly tracking a screw-up slow climb toward becoming a person. The amnesia version of this show could never give you that speech, because that speech only means something if you remember who Rigby was when he started. And read Rigby's graduation as the emotional proof of concept for the ending the whole video is walking toward. Because here's the logic of it. If this show can take its dumbest character, its biggest screw-up, the one with the least dramatic potential of anybody in the cast, and earn him a moment of real, genuine, unironic growth, a speech you actually feel, then the show has proven it can do the impossible thing. It's proven it can make change feel earned. And once a show has demonstrated that, once it's shown you it can grow its least serious character into someone worthy of a graduation speech, then it has quietly earned the right to do something much bigger. It's earned the right to go cosmic. It's earned the right to ask you to take its biggest, strangest, saddest swings seriously. Because it just showed you, with Rigby, that when this show says someone changed, it means it. And it did the years of work to back it up. So step back with me and look at what's actually happening by this point in the show's life. Because it's genuinely a little staggering once you lay it all out. By now, this dumb show, this serial aisle background noise cartoon about two guys who won't mow the lawn, is running 4 or 5 simultaneous long arcs at once. It's tracking Mordecai's romantic life across 2 full relationships and a love triangle. It's tracking Muscle Man and Starla's 5-year journey from a Season 2 breakup to a Season 6 wedding. It's tracking Benson's slow softening from angry boss to genuine friend. It's tracking Rigby's entire climb from screw-up to graduate. All of these, threaded through the show at the same time, planted seasons apart, paid off seasons later, every one of them depending on the show's memory, on that ledger it started keeping in September of 2011. 4 or 5 novels worth of character development braided together, running underneath the surface. And here's the thing that still gets me. While it was doing all of that, it was still telling fart jokes. It never stopped. It never traded the comedy in for the continuity. It kept Muscle Man yelling about his mom. It kept Benson's car getting destroyed. It kept Pops convinced it was his birthday. It kept the whole goofy texture completely intact. And it ran the serialized machine right behind that texture in the same frames at the same time. And almost nobody noticed. That's the disguise we keep coming back to, working at full power. The dumbness wasn't covering for a lack of substance. The dumbness was covering for an absolute mountain of it. 4 or 5 carefully built long arcs, hiding in plain sight, behind a costume of jokes so convincing that you could watch the entire thing and walk away calling it disposable, never once realizing you just watched one of the most patiently constructed shows on television keep score on half a dozen lives at once. And the part that I find almost impossible to wrap my head around is that none of this was an accident. None of it just happened. Somebody had to actually sit in a room and decide to build it this way, to run a hidden epic underneath a cartoon about groundskeepers. Which is exactly the question I want to climb into next. How on earth they actually made it. And to understand how a show this strange held together, it helps to know how unusually it was actually put together. Because I've been talking about the writing, the arcs, the slow smuggling in of weight, like the cleverness lived entirely on the page. And it didn't. A lot of what makes this show feel the way it feels, that lived in 2 a.m, these people actually know each other warmth, came from the room where it got performed. So before we go down into the darker, colder part of all this, the cosmic part, I want to sit for a minute in something small and human. The craft underneath the cleverness. The hands that made it. Here's the detail that cracked it open for me. Most animated shows record their actors one at a time. It's just easier. You book a booth, one performer comes in, they read their lines into a microphone, alone, often with nobody to play off, sometimes not even hearing the other half of the conversation. An editor stitches the separate performances together later. And it works. It's the industry standard, but if you listen for it, you can feel it. The lines arrive a little too clean. Everybody waits their turn. Nobody steps on anybody. It sounds like dialogue, because that's exactly what it is. Lines. Delivered. Regular show didn't do that. The cast recorded together, in the same room, in group sessions, all at once, the way a real conversation actually happens. And once you know that, you cannot unhear it. That's the thing. That's the texture. The way the guys talk over each other, the way a reaction lands a half second early because the actor genuinely heard the other actor say the dumb thing. The little overlaps and stumbles and pile-ons that you can't really fake by gluing separate takes together. Read this way, the group recording is the technical root of the whole show's emotional realism. The friendships sound real because they were recorded as conversations. The performances are reacting to each other because the people were in the room reacting to each other. The warmth isn't a writing trick. It's a recording choice. It's the sound of people who are actually together, being together, on tape. And I find that genuinely lovely. That the most felt thing about the show is partly just a microphone setup. But it gets better because once you start looking at who was in that room, the room turns out to be smaller than the show could ever possibly let on. Let me give you the one that always stops people. Sam Marin. If you've watched this show, you know Benson, the gumball machine. The boss, the one perpetually one bad afternoon away from a full meltdown. the voice of every authority figure who just wants the work done. You know Pops, the gentle pink lollipop man, soft and dreamy and kind in a way that turns out to matter enormously later, in ways I'll get to. And you know Muscle Man, the loud, sweaty green guy who will not stop telling you about his mother. 3 of the most distinct voices on the entire show. 3 completely different people, the angry boss, the gentle innocent, the obnoxious loudmouth, and they are all one guy, they're all Sam Marin. One actor, 3 of the pillars the show stands on. I had to sit with that for a second the first time I learned it, because those 3 do not sound like they could share a single throat. And it's not just Marin. J.G. Quintel, the guy who created the whole thing, he's in the booth too, and he's not just playing Mordecai the Blue Jay we followed this whole time. He's also High Five Ghost, the little floating ghost with the raised hand. The creator is 2 of the people in the park. William Salyers is Rigby. The entire run, start to finish, that raccoon never changes hands. But the head count, the actual head count of distinct human beings making all these distinct characters, it's so much lower than the size of the world implies. And frame it this way, because I think there's a quiet joke buried in it. This show feels enormous. By the end, it's juggling a universe, multiple planets, a cast of dozens. And the boss, the owner, the loudmouth, 3 separate corners of that universe are the same person doing different voices into the same microphone. There's something so homemade about that, so small. A handful of friends in a room, one of them doing half the town in funny voices, building a thing that would eventually feel galaxy-sized. The universe is huge and the crew is tiny, and I love that the show never lets the seams show. Then there's the one that sounds made up, Skips, the silent immortal Yeti, the big quiet one who knows everything, who's lived 1,000 years, who shows up and fixes the unfixable and almost never explains himself. The most stoic, least talkative major character on the show, and he is voiced by Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, the guy with one of the most recognizable voices in the world, lending it to the character who, by design, barely speaks. There's something perfect about that casting, hiding a voice that famous inside a man of that few words. And here's the part that gets me. Hamill cared enough to come back when they made regular show The Lost Tapes, the revival that premiered on Cartoon Network on the 11th of May 2026. 40 new episodes of it, he returned to voice Skips again. Years later, he came back for the Quiet Yeti. That's not a guy phoning in a paycheck. That's somebody who knew the character mattered. And even the designs carry this homemade fingerprint. Benson, the boss, the gumball machine, he didn't spring fully formed out of a network pitch. His design comes from an earlier short film Quintel made, a student-era thing called 2 in the AM PM. That's the soil all of this grew out of. Little CalArts shorts. Sam Marin himself is a CalArts grad who'd worked with Quintel on student films before any of this was a show. So this whole sprawling cosmic 8-season thing, the boss who runs the park, the voices, the world, you can trace it straight back to a couple of art school kids making short films together. The enormous machine has a tiny, scrappy origin, and you can still feel it in the bones of the thing. So here's what I keep landing on. The warmth of this show, the part that makes it feel like hanging out with people you know, that was never just good writing. It was baked into how the thing got performed. Real friends in a real room, talking over each other into the same microphones, a couple of them quietly playing half the cast, one of them a movie legend playing the guy who won't talk. The warmth is in the writing, yes, but it's also in the wood. It's structural. It was built that way on purpose, in the recording before a single line ever reached your ears, which is exactly what makes the next part hurt the way it does, because all that warmth, all that real human closeness is what the show is about to quietly take away from the one character who could least afford to lose it. And once you start pulling on the quiet characters, the show stops being funny in the most beautiful way, starting with the one who never says much at all. Because here's the thing about regular show that took me an embarrassingly long time to notice. The loudest characters carry the smallest secrets. Mordecai and Rigby are an open book. You know everything about them within about 4 episodes, their fears, their failures, their whole deal, but the show built its real weight, its real grief, into the people standing at the edges of the frame, and it buried that grief under the fewest possible words. The deeper you go into the back half of this show, the obscurer and stranger and sadder it gets, and almost all of that sadness lives in characters who, on the surface, barely talk at all. So let's go down there, let's go into the buried half of this thing, the part the show never advertised, the part it tucked behind a Yeti who answers most questions with a single word. And I call it the buried half on purpose because that's exactly what it feels like. The first few seasons are all up on the surface, sunny, loud, the park and the snack bar, and the two slackers dodging work. But under that, the longer it ran, the more the show kept digging little graves and dropping whole lives into them. Lives with grief in them, lives with centuries in them, and the strangest thing is which characters it chose to bury all of that under. Not the leads, the quiet ones, the ones at the edge of the shot you'd never think to ask about. Skips. The big gray immortal Yeti who fixes everything, who knows everything, who shows up exactly when the gang has summoned some demon they don't understand, and quietly explains the rules of the universe before fixing the golf cart. For most of the early show, he's basically a cheat code. Got a problem? Ask Skips. He'll know. He always knows. And the joke, the surface joke, is that he never explains how he knows. He just does. He's the strong, silent type turned all the way up, a wall of muscle and patience, who'd rather skip everywhere he goes, literally skip, than waste a word telling you about himself. And for years, that's all he is. The guy who knows things, the guy who's strangely good at everything. You laugh, you move on, you don't ask why a Yeti at a park has the combat skills of an ancient warrior and the calm of someone who's seen the world end a few times. You just accept it as part of the show's logic, where nothing needs a reason. But think about him for a second the way you'd think about a real person. There's something a little off about somebody who's that good at everything and tells you nothing about themselves. A person who can fix any machine, win any fight, and handle any horror from beyond the stars without raising his voice didn't get that way by accident. You don't earn that kind of calm cheaply. Somewhere behind that flat, steady face is a price that got paid. The early show never asks what it was. It just lets him stand there, arms crossed, knowing everything, and it lets you assume he's always been exactly this. The quietest character in the cast, and somehow the one you ask the fewest questions about, which, when you look back, is the whole con. He was the most interesting person in the park the entire time, and the show kept him in soft focus on purpose, waiting for the right moment to pull him forward. And then there's an episode called Skips' Story, Season 5, Episode 22, and it aired April 14th, 2014. And it's not a regular 11-minute episode. It's a half-hour special. The show stops, takes a breath, and decides it's finally going to tell you who this man actually is. And what comes out is, honestly, one of the saddest things this dumb little cartoon ever did. I mean that, I'm not exaggerating for the video. Let me tell it slowly, the way the show does, because it deserves that. He wasn't always Skips, that's the first thing. The name you've known him by for 5 seasons isn't his name. Once, a very long time ago, he was a different person with a different word for who he was. He was Walks. Just Walks. A normal name for someone who, at that point, was a fairly normal young guy. Not the legend, not the immortal, not the wall of calm at the back of the park. Just a kid named Walks, with a whole life still ahead of him, and the show lets you sit with that version of him for a while before it takes everything away. And then he becomes immortal. This is the mythology cracking open for the first time. There are these beings called the Guardians of Eternal Youth, and through them, Walks is made immortal. Not for fun, not as a reward. He's made immortal for a job, and the job is a fight. There's a bully, a destroyer named Clorgbane, and Walks is chosen to be the one who fights him. Not once, forever, every 157 years, the fight comes back around, and Walks has to be there to meet it. That's the deal. That's what immortality buys him. An enemy that returns on a schedule for the rest of a life that now has no end. And just say that number out loud and let it sit. 157 years. That's longer than most countries have existed in their current form. That's generations of ordinary people being born, living their whole lives, growing old, and dying while one Yeti waits for the clock to come back around to the same fight he's already had. Whole eras pass between the rounds. The world changes completely. The way the world we live in now would be unrecognizable to someone from that many years ago. And through all of it, he just keeps existing, keeps waiting, keeps knowing that the destroyer is coming back and that he'll have to be standing there when it does. Immortality, the way most stories sell it, is freedom. You get all the time in the world. Here it's the opposite. The time isn't yours. It's already booked. It belongs to the fight. And I want you to sit with how lonely that already is, before we even get to the part that breaks you. Imagine being told you'll live forever, and the whole reason, is so you can keep fighting the same monster across centuries. That's not a gift, that's a sentence. The show frames it almost like a duty handed down, a burden somebody has to carry, and Walks is the one whose shoulders it lands on. But that's not why he changed his name. And this is the part where the show stops being a comedy entirely for a few minutes and just becomes a story about loss. He had a girlfriend Her name was Mona. Her full name, the name the show gives her, so it lands a little heavier, the way a full name always does, was Desdemona. Mona. And for a while there, in the flashback, you actually get to see him happy. That's the part that makes the rest of it hurt. Before the show takes her away, it lets you watch the two of them together, lets you see what he had, lets you see the version of Walks who had somebody who wasn't standing at the back of a park alone for the next several centuries. It gives you the warmth first. It always gives you the warmth first. And then, during one of these fights, during the battle with Clorgbane, a section of the ceiling came down, it fell on her, and she was killed, right there. In the middle of his fight, in the middle of the very thing he was made immortal to do, the person he loved was crushed, and he couldn't stop it. Sit with the cruelty of the timing. He was made to live forever, specifically so he could fight this monster. He was handed all of this power for that one purpose. And the cost of that purpose, the thing it took from him while he was busy doing his duty, was the one person who made the forever worth having. He had all this strength, an entire eternity stretching out in front of him, and none of it, not one bit of it, was enough to keep her from dying a few feet away. The man who can't be killed had to watch the one person he couldn't live without get killed instead. That's not a fight scene. That's the worst day of an endless life. And so he changed his name. He stopped being Walks. He became Skips. Because Desdemona used to love to skip. That was her. That was the thing she did, the way she moved through the world, light and happy. And he took it, the gesture, the joy of it, and he made it his name, forever. Not for a season of mourning, not for a year, for the rest of an endless life. Which means every single person who has ever said his name since, every time the gang yells across the park for him, every time somebody asks him to fix something, every single one of them is, without having any idea, saying a small prayer for a girl who died a very long time ago. The whole park speaks her memory out loud every day, and none of them know they're doing it. He carries her in the one word people use to get his attention. He turned a wound into a name and then walked around answering to it for centuries. Read this way, and I genuinely think this holds up. That's the single most quietly devastating writing choice in the entire show. Think about what it actually means. The strongest character, the one who can't be hurt, the one who fixes everyone else's problems, renamed himself after the person he couldn't save. His name is a memorial. He wears his grief as his identity every day, and almost nobody around him even knows. They just call him Skips and ask him to fix the cart. The strongest one in the room is also the one carrying the oldest, heaviest grief, and he carries it so quietly that the show went 5 seasons before it told you. I have to stop for a second, because that's a lot, and if you're lying there in the dark right now half awake, I don't want to rush past it. That's the kind of thing that doesn't belong in a cartoon about 2 guys who don't want to rake leaves. And yet there it is, that's the show. That's what it was always doing under the noise. And then it adds one more detail, and this one might be my favorite because of how cruel and ordinary it is at the same time. Skips doesn't just get to be immortal and walk around forever for free. There's upkeep. Every year, on his birthday, he has to perform a ceremonial dance, a specific dance, and if he does it, he keeps living. That's the cost. Not a battle, not a sacrifice in some grand sense, just a thing he has to do, on schedule, once a year, every year, forever, or it ends. And I want to read that as more than a fun bit of lore, because I think the show means it as more than that. Frame it this way. His immortality isn't a state he's in, it's a thing he has to keep choosing. Every birthday, he has to actively do the work of staying alive. And if you connect that to Mona, to the grief he renamed himself after, it starts to look like the show's whole quiet idea about loss. That grief isn't something that happens to you once and then it's over. It's something you have to keep living through, on a schedule, forever. Every year the day comes back around, and every year you have to choose, again, to keep going. Eternity, in this show, isn't a gift you're given. It's an obligation you keep showing up for, a dance you have to do whether you feel like it or not, just to earn another year of carrying what you carry. That's heavy stuff to hang on a Yeti, and the show knew it was heavy, which is exactly why it hit it. I'll say one quick thing here while we're sitting in the deep part of the pool, and then I'll get right back to the lore, because it matters to me. If any of this is landing for you, if the way this show snuck real feeling into a comedy is the kind of thing you actually want more of, this channel does a lot of it, slow and careful, the same way we're going through this right now. And it genuinely helps to have you subscribed and along for it. That's it. That's the whole ask. Now back to the babies, because yes, the immortal beings who did all this to Skips are babies. Let's open up the mythology of the Guardians of Eternal Youth, because once Skip's story cracks the door, you realize there's an entire cosmic family standing behind this one quiet groundskeeper. The Guardians are 5 immortal babies. I know how that sounds. 5 floating immortal infants, and they're the ones who hold this kind of power over life and eternity. There's Reginald, who's the leader, and there's Oswald, and Boswald, and Griswold, and Archibald. 5 of them, a little pantheon of babies running the machinery of endless youth. And the show, of course, plays the look of them for comedy, because they're babies, but their function in the story is dead serious. They're the ones who chose walks. They're the architecture under the whole arrangement. And it's a little funny, genuinely, picturing them. 5 immortal infants, floating there, deciding the fate of a warrior, holding the keys to eternal life in their tiny baby hands. The show absolutely knows it's funny. That's the cover. That's the joke on the surface, the same way Skips being a one-word Yeti is the joke on the surface. You look at 5 babies and you laugh and you don't take it seriously, and meanwhile the thing they represent, the machinery of endless youth, the power to make a person live forever, is one of the heaviest concepts the show ever put on screen. The silliness is the camouflage. It's the same trick again, just dressed in diapers instead of gray fur. And one of them, Archibald, dies. He's killed in an episode called Fists of Justice, which means even the immortal ones, even the beings who hand out eternity to other people, aren't actually safe themselves. The thing that grants endless life can still be ended. Read that for a second. The Guardians of Eternal Youth are not, it turns out, guaranteed eternal anything. That's a quietly brutal little idea to drop into the background of a comedy, that immortality has limits even for the immortals, that even the beings sitting at the top of this whole cosmic system can be taken off the board. Nothing in this universe is truly permanent. Not even the ones whose entire job is permanence. And then there's the brother, because every cosmic family in a story like this has the one who went wrong. The Guardians have an evil brother, and his name is Clorgbane. Clorgbane the Destroyer. The same Clorgbane that skips, that walks, was made immortal to fight. He's family. He's their brother, the Dark One, the one who has to be fought every 157 years, on that long, slow cycle forever. And his fight with Skips is the one shown back in Fists of Justice, Season 3, Episode 24, which aired April 30th, 2012. So the show actually planted the battle before it ever explained the grief underneath it. You saw the fists before you understood the funeral. Now sit with the shape of all this for a second, because I think it's the most important thing in this whole stretch. A cosmic family, immortal siblings, and one evil one who turned against the rest. A battle that returns on a fixed cycle again and again across enormous spans of time. A duty handed to a chosen warrior. Loss baked into the whole arrangement. Does that shape sound familiar? Because if you've watched where this show ends up, it should. What this suggests, and I'd say it pretty confidently, is that the writers were quietly rehearsing the exact cosmic structure the finale would eventually reveal. Decades of in-universe time and good and evil siblings and a war on a long fixed clock. All of it test-driven here, in the backstory of the quiet guy at the park. They were practicing the big song in a small room, and you didn't even notice they were warming up. A whole cosmic mythology, an entire family of immortal beings, an eternal war, all of it tucked behind one groundskeeper who'd rather not talk about it. That's the trick. That's the whole trick of this show, right there in one character. And here's the part that ties Skips back to the small, gentle heart of the show, so he isn't just a window into the cosmic stuff. Skips has been in Pops' life since Pops was a child. There's an episode, Skips vs. Technology, Season 3, Episode 15, which aired February 6, 2012, where you see it. This immortal warrior, this man who fought a destroyer across centuries and buried the love of his life, has also just quietly been around, been part of Pops' whole life since childhood, watching over him, a steady presence at the edge of someone's entire existence. And that detail does something sneaky to the timeline in your head. Because if Skips has known Pops since Pops was a little kid, and Skips is this ancient immortal being, then Skips didn't wander into the park one day and take a maintenance job. He was there for Pops, around Pops, long before any of the events we watch. The quiet handyman who fixes the carts has actually been standing guard over the gentlest character in the show for a lifetime, and he never once made a big deal of it. That's not a coincidence the show throws away. That's a thread, a man who's seen everything choosing to spend his endless life close to one soft, kind, fragile person. Hold on to that, because it matters more than it looks like right now. And that's why Skips is the bridge. He's the hinge the whole show turns on, the one character who has a foot in both worlds. He stands in the tiny, mundane world of the park, fixing carts and grunting one-word answers and skipping across the lawn. And he stands in the enormous ancient cosmic world of immortal babies and eternal enemies and grief that's older than countries. He connects the small show to the big show. He's been quietly holding both ends of it the entire time, and you only realize it once you've gone down into his story and come back up. And once you notice the show does this, hides whole lives inside its quietest people, you start checking everyone. You start looking sideways at the loud ones too, wondering what they're not saying. Which brings me, in a much lighter key, to Muscle Man. Muscle Man, who is mostly there to be gross. The pranks, the my mom jokes, the shirt coming off, all of it. He's comic relief turned up to a volume that's almost a dare. And you'd never go looking for a hidden past under all that, because he seems like the most surface character in the entire cast. But the show gives him one anyway. There's an episode, Power Tower Season 5, Episode 11, which aired November 18, 2013, and it quietly tells you that Muscle Man was once a professional bodybuilder in his youth. An actual professional. He had this whole disciplined, dedicated life, and at some point he walked away from it, abandoned the whole lifestyle, and became the guy you know now. It's a smaller, lighter echo of the same move the show pulls with Skips. Nothing is devastating, no buried funeral, no eternal war. Just a quiet little reveal that even the grossest, loudest, least serious character in the show used to be someone else, used to be more than the gag. Read it as the same instinct working at a smaller scale. The show couldn't help it. Even its joke characters got a past. Even the comic relief had a before. And that's the pattern once you can see it. That's the design. Regular Show took its deepest sadness, its oldest grief, its heaviest, most adult feelings about loss and duty and the cost of going on, and it hid all of it inside the characters who said the least. It didn't put the saddest story in the show on the lips of the main characters. It put it in a Yeti who answers in single words. It made you go looking, it made you watch long enough and care enough and stay quiet enough yourself to find it. And I think it did that on purpose. I think the whole point was that the sadness would feel discovered rather than delivered. That you'd have to earn it, so that when it finally hit you, it felt like something you found instead of something you were told. The show rewarded patience. It rewarded the people who kept watching past the leaf raking in the arcade games, who trusted that there was something underneath. And there was. There always was. But Skips, for all his weight, for all that buried grief, isn't the center of it. He's the bridge, not the destination. Because the being who actually sat at the heart of this entire cosmic machine, the most important figure in the whole universe of this show, was hiding somewhere far gentler, far sillier, far easier to underestimate than a silent Yeti. And we have to talk about the candy-headed old man who turned out to matter more than anyone. But the deepest thing this show ever hid wasn't in its quietest character. It was sitting in plain sight at the center of every episode, wearing a top hat and insisting it was his birthday. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start the show over and the whole thing tilts. So let's go back to that loop we kept circling earlier, the one the show never seemed to want to answer. Why is Pops the owner? Why is this gentle, lollipop-headed old man, this character who genuinely struggles to understand that a glass of water is not a friend, somehow the heir to the entire park? Mr. Maillard runs the place, barks the orders, signs the checks, and then defers again and again to his strange grown son who laughs at clouds. For years, that was just a sweet little absurdity humming under the surface. A man with the mind of a delighted toddler owns the place where all our characters work. We laughed and moved on. The show let us move on. And the whole time, that question wasn't a throwaway gag. It was a fuse. Here's where I have to slow down because this is the single biggest idea Regular Show ever buried. And it's so much bigger than the park, bigger than the planet, that the first time it lands, it almost doesn't feel like the same show. The dumb show about two groundskeepers who never wanted to do their jobs was, underneath everything, sitting on top of a cosmology older than time itself. And it parked that cosmology inside the one character we'd been trained for years to take the least seriously. Let me set the scene properly, because if you're drifting off, you deserve to actually picture this. Season 8. The back half. The show is winding toward its ending, and there's an episode called The Ice Tape. And in The Ice Tape, Mr. Maillard finally sits down and explains everything. Not a wink, not a half answer, the actual truth about who Pops is. And the truth is this: Pops is not human. Pops was never human. Pops is the embodiment of pure good, an actual living force of goodness, from a planet called Lollyland. And his real name, his name before he was Pops, is Megacranus. Sit with that for a second. The man who gets overjoyed by a butterfly, who treats every small kindness like the greatest event of his life, who is so guileless he can barely process cruelty, is not a fool the universe forgot about. He's goodness itself, walking around in a fancy suit, calling everyone his dear friend. The show took the concept of pure good, the most abstract idea you could possibly try to put on screen, and it gave it a round pink head and a giddy laugh and let it host birthday parties. And Honestly, the more I think about that choice, the more it floors me. Pure good doesn't arrive as a warrior or a king. It arrives as the harmless one, the one nobody guards against. Now the origin, because the origin is where the whole thing turns tender, and I want to actually slow down here, the show implies that goodness this enormous still had to come into the world somehow, and the way it came in is almost unbearably gentle. Mr. Maillard, before he was the gruff old owner we know, was a meteor fragments salesman, a guy who sold pieces of space rock. And one day, working that strange little job, he found something inside an asteroid, a baby, and he didn't run any tests, didn't check for a bloodline, didn't ask whether this thing from the sky was really his to keep. He just took the baby home and raised him as his son. Think about what that means for every scene you've already watched. Every time Mr. Maillard sighs at Pops, every time he's exasperated, every time he softens, you're watching a father with a child who is not his by blood and never could be. The dumb, gentle old man at the center of the show is a fallen star that a father chose to love. Not a star he was given, a star he decided on. And read this way, that's the show making a quiet argument, and it's an argument I didn't expect from a cartoon about a vending machine and a Yeti. Love is something you decide, not something you're born into. Mr. Maillard found a baby in a rock, an actual alien, no relation, no reason, and chose. He chose to be a dad. And he kept choosing for what looks like an entire lifetime, with no payoff, no recognition, just the daily work of looking after a son who would never fully grow up. That's the kind of thing this show would normally undercut with a joke. Here it just lets it stand, a man and the star he raised. Quick aside, because I have to, I genuinely was not ready the first time for a slacker comedy to make me think about adoption and unconditional love through a guy named after a fizzy drink. But that's regular show, that's the whole trick of it. It hands you the deepest idea in the goofiest possible wrapper and dares you to keep laughing. Okay, back to it. Because pure good is only half the picture, and the other half is where it goes from sweet to genuinely cosmic. If Pops is the embodiment of pure good, the show needed a mirror, and it is one. His name is Anti-Pops, and his real name, his Lollyland name, is Malum Cranus. He is Pops' evil twin brother, the embodiment of pure evil, from the same planet, born in some sense from the same origin. Look at those names sitting next to each other. Megacranus and Malum Cranus, same surname. Brothers, good and evil, not as distant opposing armies, not as a hero on one continent and a villain on another, but as siblings, two halves of one family. And read that way, I think it's the show quietly refusing the easy version of villainy. The enemy isn't some faceless dark lord who showed up from nowhere. The enemy is family. The enemy is the mirror. The enemy is the other half of the exact same beginning. The thing trying to end the universe shares a last name with the gentlest creature in it. And here's the piece that, once you hear it, reaches back and recolors literally every episode you've ever watched. Pops and Anti-Pops are fated to battle. Not once. Not in some final showdown that wraps things up neat. They are fated to battle every 14 billion years. And every time they fight to a stalemate, the universe resets, starts over, wipes clean, and begins again. And this isn't something the show makes up on the spot to sound impressive. It's written down. It's recorded in a place on Lollyland called the Hall of Tapestries. Good and evil, the same two brothers, locked in a fight older than creation, looping the cosmos back to zero again and again across spans of time the human mind can't really hold. Let me put the scale next to the show, because that's the only way to feel it. On one side, you have two groundskeepers arguing about whose turn it is to rake leaves, stretching a 20-minute chore into a near-death experience over a video game. On the other side, you have a 14 billion year cycle of cosmic destruction and rebirth carved into tapestries on an alien world. And those two things are the same show. They were always the same show. The park sitcom, the meatheads, and the coffee shop and the golf cart was sitting on a clockwork older than time the entire run. And I'll be honest about something here, because I don't want to oversell the conspiracy of it. Most of this Pops and Anti-Pops mythology, the pure good, the pure evil, the brothers, the 14 billion year reset, all of it really accumulates in the final two seasons. I'm not going to stand here and tell you the writers had Megacranus and the Hall of Tapestries mapped out in season 1, while Mordecai and Rigby were fighting over a sandwich. That's not honest, and the show deserves honesty more than it deserves a tidy legend. This is a late escalation, a bold one, a swing for the fences in the last act of the series. But here's the strange part, and it's the part that keeps me up. Even as a late addition, it reaches backward and reframes everything. It takes years of harmless gags and quietly tells you they were resting on top of something enormous all along. It's not a decade-long secret plan. It just feels by the end, like it might as well have been. So watch how carefully the show actually smuggles it in, because even in 2 seasons, they refuse to just dump it on you. Antipops doesn't crash through the wall announcing the end of all things. He debuts in an episode called The Dream Warrior, and he arrives sideways, the way the best threats do. A presence, a wrongness, something off, and then he builds. Each appearance gets a little heavier, a little more loaded with the sense that this isn't a monster of the week, this is the thing everything has been pointing at. And then he appears fully in an episode called Space Escape, and by then he's not a hint anymore. He's the main antagonist, the final enemy, the one the whole series has apparently been walking toward. And that's the craft of it, even compressed into a single season. They introduced the most important villain in the entire show right at the end, and they paced him so that he feels inevitable, rather than tacked on. He feels like he was always coming. Like the show had simply been too polite to mention him until now. A last season antagonist built to feel like a first season prophecy. Now let me connect this to something that happened earlier, in season 7, because this is where I think the show's hand starts to show, where you can actually catch it setting the table. There's a special called the Dome Experiment, and in it, a dome gets placed over the park. Just a dome. A weird containment thing, the kind of high-concept gag the show loved. But that dome doesn't stay a gag. Eventually, the entire park, the dome and all, turns into a spacecraft, with everyone trapped inside, the small, contained, mundane little world, the place where these guys griped about chores, literally lifts off the ground and launches into the cosmic stakes. And I love this as a piece of structure, I really do, because it's the whole thesis of the show made physical. For years, the park was the container for tiny problems. A magic keyboard, a cursed cart, a buff snowman, and then the container itself rips out of the earth and becomes a ship hurtling into the larger story. The dome foreshadowing starts in season 7 and becomes central to the final arc in season 8. The mundane shore world doesn't get left behind when the cosmic plot arrives. The mundane shore world becomes the vehicle that carries everyone into it. The park flies. Now, fans have theorized that the dome you see in season 7 was deliberately foreshadowed even earlier, planted across older episodes as setup for the very end. I want to flag that clearly because it's the kind of claim that sounds great and spreads fast. Nothing official confirms specific pre-season 7 dome foreshadowing. That's a fan reading, not verified fact. But I get why people reach for it. Once you know where the dome leads, you start wanting it to have been there all along. And here's the masterstroke. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that makes me defend this show to anyone who'll listen at 2 in the morning. The single dumbest, most harmless seeming character in the entire series, the one we were trained from the first episode to treat as comic relief, the one who couldn't tell a glass of water from a companion, was the entire time the most important being in the universe. The fate of all existence rested on the gentlest creature imaginable, and the show knew exactly what it was doing by hiding it there. Because where do you hide the most important thing in the cosmos? You hide it inside the joke. You hide it inside the guy nobody takes seriously. You hide it under a top hat and a birthday hat and a laugh so innocent it's almost painful. Read this way, Pops is the show's deepest joke and its deepest sincerity at the exact same time. Pure goodness disguised as a fool so that the survival of everything depends on the kindest character a writer could dream up. And the joke of those birthdays. All those episodes where Pops just wants to celebrate his birthday, where the whole plot is him getting overexcited about cake and candles and one more year. That joke is now sitting right next to the truth that he is a being older than creation itself, a force that has watched the universe end and begin again across timescales that make a birthday meaningless. He counts his years like a child. He has lived through resets of all reality. Both things are true. The show holds them together and refuses to let go of either. And there's one more layer the scale opens up, and I'll mark this as my own read because the show doesn't say it outright. If the universe resets every 14 billion years, if the same 2 brothers fight the same fight and the cosmos starts over again and again, then what suggests itself is that every running gag, every chore, every doomed little errand might be part of a loop. That on some level, the show is hinting all of this has happened before and will happen again. That Mordecai and Rigby skipping their work, getting cursed for it, barely surviving, is not a one-time accident, but a groove worn into the universe across countless restarts. I can't prove the show means that, but once the reset is on the table, the thought is hard to put back. There's another one fans like to pass around, and I'll flag it the same way, as theory and nothing more. Some fans have theorized that the ships Mordecai and Rigby pilot in the later episodes are the same ones from the movie, hinting the series could circle all the way back and end where the movie began. It's a lovely idea. A perfect closed loop, but nothing official confirms it, It lives in the fan space, a wish more than a fact, and I'm only mentioning it because it rhymes so well with everything else the back half of the show is doing. The reaching backward. The sense of a circle quietly closing. And under all of it, holding the whole impossible weight is one detail I find almost funny in how small it is. This cosmic being, this embodiment of pure good, this fallen star older than time, is voiced by Sam Marin. The same warmth in every line, the same gentle, bewildered joy whether Pops is delighting over a balloon or facing down the end of all existence. One voice carrying both the silliest character and the most important being in the universe, never once tipping you off, never once letting the grandeur leak into the giggle. So that's the secret the show kept in plain sight. The owner question wasn't a loose thread. It was the doorway to a cosmology. The gentle fool was the keystone of everything. And somehow, Regular Show looked at the biggest idea it had, good and evil as brothers, the universe dying and being reborn forever, and decided the safest place to keep it was behind a birthday cake. Which brings me to the force that all of this eventually has to channel through, the thing the show kept handing back to its heroes whenever the stakes got too big to face alone: the power. Which brings me, finally, to the night this show ended, and to the quiet decision to give its last episode the same name as its first. Because everything we've walked through tonight, all of it the memory the show started keeping back in Season 3, the romances that taught us a world could carry a grief forward, the screw-up who climbed all the way up to a graduation speech, the gentle pink lollipop man who turned out to be the most important being in the universe. Every single thread, the show gathered up and tied off in one night. One night, the 16th of January, 2017. A regular epic final battle. 3 parts, Season 8, episodes 27 through 29, aired back to back to back in a single sitting, like the show couldn't bear to make you wait between the pieces of its own goodbye. And here's the thing I want you to feel before anything else happens, before we even get to who lives and who dies. The third part, the last chapter of the whole 8-year machine. It's called The Power. The Power, the exact title of the very first episode, the Season 1 premiere 261 episodes earlier. I told you, way back at the start of all this, that the last episode shares its name with the first, and I told you it like a fun fact, a little curiosity to keep in your back pocket. But now we're standing at the actual moment, and I need you to understand what that title is doing here. Because it isn't a coincidence, and it isn't a cute wink. It's the show closing the loop on purpose, with both hands in public. Let me sit with that for a second, because I think it's one of the most deliberate things a television show has ever done. 261 episodes. 8 seasons, a universe that grew from 2 guys avoiding a leaf rake into a 14 billion year war between good and evil. And when it came time to name the final chapter, the show reached all the way back to its own first words and used them again. The power, then the power. The story starts and the story ends under the same 2 words. And read this way, that shared title is the show declaring its entire run a single closed loop. One enormous circle. A beginning that was always quietly holding hands with its ending, 261 episodes apart, finally allowed to touch. For a show this obsessed with cycles, with resets, with things coming back around, that's the only shape the ending could possibly have taken. It renamed its last chapter after its first because the whole thing was always one loop, and it wanted you to see the seam click shut. And people watched it close. Part 1 drew 1.33 million viewers. Parts 2 and 3, 1.37 million. I bring that up not because the number is huge, because honestly for a finale it's a modest human-sized number, but because I picture all those people on a Monday night sitting down together to watch a cartoon about groundskeepers say goodbye, and a lot of them, I'd bet, not fully ready for what that goodbye was about to ask of its softest character. Because here's what actually happens, and I want to slow all the way down for this, because the show does too. Every arc we've talked about converges. Mordecai and Rigby, the Blue Jay and the Raccoon, the 2 guys who never wanted to do their jobs, they're there, and they help the way friends help, and the whole sprawling cast funnels down toward one confrontation that the entire series had secretly been building toward the whole time. Pops, the candy-headed innocent, the gentlest being who ever lived, finally faces Anti-Pops, his evil twin. The dark half of a cosmic coin that's been flipping for 14 billion years, the 2 of them born to destroy each other over and over, world after world, forever. That's the fight. That's the thing the universe has been waiting on since before there were universes. The good brother against the bad brother, and only one of them is supposed to walk away. And the show refuses to let it end the way you think it has to end. This is the part that gets me every time. Pops doesn't simply win. He doesn't outpower Anti-Pops, doesn't blast him out of existence, doesn't stand triumphant over a beaten enemy while the music swells. And you have to understand how primed we are as an audience to expect exactly that. We've been trained by 1,000 stories that the final battle ends with the hero standing and the villain falling. That's the deal. That's the shape we walk in expecting, especially after 8 seasons of build, especially when the war is this old and the evil is this total. The good brother beats the bad brother. Roll credits. Instead, the gentlest character on the entire show walks up to the embodiment of all the evil in his universe, and he hugs him. He hugs his evil twin, and he talks to him. He convinces Anti-Pops to repent. He reaches the one thing inside that creature that 14 billion years of war never once tried to reach, the possibility that it could choose to stop. Think about that for a moment. 14 billion years, every previous version of this fight, every world where these two brothers were born to destroy each other, nobody ever tried this. Nobody ever just held him. The war went on and on because every single time, both sides played the war. And Pops, the soft one, the dreamy one, the one everyone underestimated from the first frame, is the first being in the history of the universe to try something other than winning. And then, together, the two of them, the good and the evil, finally holding on to each other instead of tearing each other apart, Pops pushes them both into the sun. And they die there, peacefully, together. The cycle that had spun for 14 billion years, the endless machine of one brother killing the other, and the whole thing resetting and starting again, it ends. Not with a victory, with a mercy. I have to stop because I genuinely think that's one of the bravest endings a show like this ever committed to. Think about where we started, 2 guys avoiding responsibility. That's the premise. That's the entire joke at the bottom of this show. 2 slackers who would do anything, summon anything, break any law of physics to get out of a little honest work. And the show ends by handing the single largest responsibility imaginable, the saving of the entire universe, to its gentlest, most childlike, least capable seeming character, and having him accept it. Pops dies to save everyone. He dies to save his friends, he dies to save every world, and here's the part that breaks me a little. He dies to save his enemy too. He doesn't just end Anti-Pops. He redeems him first, and then he takes him with him, gently, into the light, so that the bad brother gets to die as something other than a monster. The show that started with 2 characters running from the smallest possible duty ends with one character embracing the largest possible one, completely, and paying for it with his life. And Red Pops choosing mercy over victory as the show's final and largest statement, the thing it was quietly building toward under all those fart jokes for 8 years. Because he could have won. The story gave him the option to simply destroy the evil thing and be done. And the show says no. The show says that the way you actually break a cycle of violence, the only way, is to refuse it. You don't end the war by winning the war, because winning the war just resets the war. That's the whole horror of a 14 billion year loop. Somebody always wins and it never ever stops. You end it by stepping outside the logic of the fight entirely. By offering the enemy a hand instead of a fist. By choosing at the cost of your own life to let the cycle die with you rather than pass the violence on one more time. That's the thesis. That's what a dumb cartoon about lawn care decided in its final hour that it actually wanted to say. The way to break the cycle is to refuse to keep it spinning. And now I have to come back to that falling thing because this is where it finally pays off. And I've been waiting the whole video to put this piece down. The gag. The dumbest gag in the show. Rigby leans back, full of himself, and says, "Nothing on Earth can stop us," and right on cue, a spacecraft drops out of the sky. That's it. That's the whole joke. I told you at the very beginning that I'd watched this show for years and never gave that bit a second thought. And now look where we are. The entire series ends with a thing falling out of the sky. Pops and Anti-Pops falling into the sun. The Dome Experiment, the episode that turned the whole park into a spacecraft with everyone trapped inside. The ground itself becoming a ship and lifting off. Over and over across 8 seasons, this show kept dropping things from above. A cheap recurring joke about a spacecraft hitting the dirt every time Rigby got cocky. And read this way, that running gag was the show rehearsing for years the exact language of its own ending. Either it's accidental foreshadowing or it's intentional foreshadowing. And honestly, I've gone back and forth on which one I find more beautiful, but it almost doesn't matter, because the effect is the same. For 7 years, this comedy was quietly practicing the grammar of its own apocalypse. Things fall from the sky. That's the joke, and then that's the threat, and then that's the salvation. The same direction, down, out of the heavens, kept arriving as a punchline until the day it arrived as the climax. The dome that became a ship, the spacecraft that kept crashing on Q, and finally 2 old brothers falling into a star to save creation. Salvation and threat, both falling from the sky, the show telling you the shape of its ending in the form of a gag you laughed at and forgot. The bit that looked the laziest was paying the most attention. I keep coming back to that because it's the whole show in miniature. The thing you dismissed was the thing that knew. But the show doesn't end on the sacrifice, and I love it for that, because a lesser show would have. A lesser show would have given you the big cosmic death and the swelling music and faded to black on the tragedy. Regular show insists on the aftermath. It insists on the part that actually matters to the people who were left, because the friendships were always the real subject, weren't they? Under the cosmic stuff, under the war, it was always 2 guys and the people they worked with at a park. So the finale jumps forward 25 years, a park reunion a quarter of a century later, everybody coming back to the place where all of it happened, older now, grown, lived. And here's the payoff I've been dying to give you, the one the early arcs promised all the way back. Rigby and Eileen are married. The screw-up raccoon, the engine of every bad decision, the part of you that says, or hear me out, what if we didn't? He's married to Eileen, and they have 2 daughters, 2 young adult daughters grown all the way up. Let that land. The character who started this entire series as the single most immature person in it, the one who couldn't be trusted to do anything, the one least likely to ever earn a real moment of growth, he grew up. He got married, he raised 2 kids into adulthood, the show tracked his climb from screw-up to graduate, and then it kept going, past the speech, past the graduation, all the way to a middle-aged man with a family at a reunion. And it lets you see it with your own eyes. The screw-ups grew up, exactly as the show had been quietly promising season after season, since it first took its thumb off the reset button. The early arcs weren't just character flavor, they were a promise. And the finale keeps it. These people, these specific ridiculous people, were allowed to grow all the way into the adults the show always believed they could become. I need a breath there, because that one always gets me more than the cosmic stuff does. Rigby with 2 grown daughters, the dumbest character on the show, having done the hardest, most ordinary, most human thing there is. He stuck around. He grew up, he built a life. And then, the final image, and this is the one I think about most, the one I'd argue is the true emotional resolution of the entire series. More than the battle, more than the reunion. Pops, in heaven. Because he died, remember. He gave everything, and the show follows him up there to wherever the gentlest soul in the universe goes when he's spent his life saving it. And what's he doing? He's watching his friends on an old videotape. An old man in heaven, sitting and watching footage of the people he loved on tape, refusing to look away, while David Bowie's Heroes plays over it, the 1977 song, Heroes. And that song isn't there by accident either. It was chosen as a tribute because David Bowie had died the year before, in January of 2016, and the show reached for that specific song in that specific moment to honor him. A goodbye folded inside a goodbye. And read that videotape and that song as the show's final thesis on memory, because I think that's exactly what it is. Remember where this all turned. Season 3, September of 2011. The moment this show decided to remember, decided that things that happened would stay happened, that this world would keep a ledger. That obsession with memory is the spine of everything we've talked about tonight. The sweater that carried a goodbye across 2 seasons, the screw-up whose graduation speech only meant something because the show remembered who he used to be. Every payoff the series ever earned, it earned by refusing to forget. And look at how it ends. It ends with an old man in heaven who refuses to let go of his friends, who sits and watches them on a tape over and over, holding on to them the only way the dead can hold on to the living. A videotape of all things. Not a grand cosmic vision of his loved ones, not some celestial reunion. A tape, the most ordinary, breakable, rewindable object there is. The kind of thing you'd actually find in a drawer in any house in the world. The show reaches for the humblest possible image of remembering, and it puts it in the hands of a man in heaven, and somehow that's bigger than anything the Cosmic War ever managed. The show that taught itself to remember in Season 3 ends with its kindest character choosing, in the afterlife, to keep remembering. To not let the tape stop. To not let the people he loved fade out just because they're gone. The whole serialized soul of the show, that refusal to let things be forgotten, compressed into one final picture. A man, a television, a tape, and the faces he can't bear to lose, set to a song about being heroes, just for one day. I have to be honest with you, I find that almost unbearably tender. After 14 billion years of cosmic war, after the sacrifice in the sun and the saving of all creation, the show's last word isn't about the universe at all. It's about a guy missing his friends and finding a way to keep them close. That's it. That's where 8 seasons land. Not on the scale of it, on the smallness of it, on the love. And the title, again, because I can't let it go and neither could the show. The Power, the last chapter named after the first. A show obsessed with cycles and resets. With the reset button, it took its thumb off all those years ago, ending by literally renaming its final chapter after its opening. 1. Closing the loop on purpose. Frame that shared title as the show declaring out loud, in the one language it had left, that its entire run was a single closed circle. A universe built on cycles, ending its story by completing one last cycle of its own, the title coming back around to where it began. The first word and the last word, the same word. The Power, and then 261 episodes of remembering later, The Power again. It's the most fitting possible shape for this particular show to end on. And the fact that they saw that somebody in that room understood the geometry of their own creation well enough to name the ending after the beginning, that's the thing I keep circling back to. They knew exactly what they'd built. They knew it was a loop, and they shut it deliberately. Now, I told you this was the ending, and for years it was, but the tape, fittingly, never quite stopped playing. Because on the 11th of May 2026, the show came back. Regular show, The Lost Tapes premiering on Cartoon Network, 40 new episodes of it, and Mark Hamill returning to voice Skips, the silent immortal Yeti, the big quiet one. There's something almost too perfect about a show that ended on an old man watching videotapes in heaven, coming back years later under the title The Lost Tapes. The tape never stopped. The footage was always still running somewhere. And I'll be careful here, because I don't want the revival to undercut the ending, and I don't think it does. An ending that deliberately sealed doesn't get unsealed by more episodes, it just gets revisited. There's speculation, and I want to flag it as exactly that. Speculation that the revival could finally break, or maybe revisit, the cyclical nature of the whole Pops and Anti-Pops battle. Nothing official confirms that. It's a question, not an answer. But there's a quiet rhyme in it, isn't there, that a show about a cycle that was finally broken comes back around for another turn. The loop, doing what loops do? And while we're glancing sideways at the corners of all this, there's a fan theory I find lovely, and I want to mark it clearly as a theory because nothing official backs it up. Fans have theorized that the ships Mordecai and Rigby pilot in some of the later episodes are the very same ships from the movie, which would mean the series could secretly end somewhere near where the movie began, another loop folded inside the loop. It's not verified canon, it's the kind of thing fans build, because this show taught them to look for circles, taught them that nothing here is wasted, that things come back around. Whether it's true or not, the fact that the audience instinctively reaches for that shape tells you everything about what the show trained us to expect. We learned, from this dumb cartoon, to assume the loop. So, here we are, the end of the night, and the governing question still sitting in front of us. The one I've been carrying this whole time. Was regular show secretly one of the most carefully built shows on television? A show that disguised an 8-season cosmic epic about good and evil, about mortality, about sacrifice, as a dumb comedy about 2 groundskeepers who never wanted to do their jobs? And if so, when exactly did the dumb show stop being dumb? And I think, having walked all the way down here with you, the answer is yes. Without hedging, yes. The dumb show was the smart one. It was always the smart one. The dumbness was never a lack of substance. It was a costume worn over a mountain of it. A disguise so good that you could watch all 261 episodes and walk away calling it disposable background noise, never once realizing you just watched a 14 billion year tragedy about mercy and memory and growing up, told in fart jokes. The cleverness wasn't hiding in any one scene. That's the thing I keep landing on. There's no single smartest moment, no one episode you can point at and say, there, that's the genius bit. Because the smartest thing regular show ever did wasn't a scene at all. It was a decision, made early, and kept for 8 years. The decision, somewhere around season 3 in September of 2011, to let a dumb show care. To take its thumb off the reset button. To let its characters remember. That's the moment the dumb show stopped being dumb, and I really do believe it's that specific that you can almost point at it on a calendar. The moment it decided its characters could remember, that actions would have weight, that a goodbye could leave a sweater behind, and a screw-up could grow into a graduate, and a gentle innocent could carry the fate of everything. Everything after that, every cosmic swing, every death, every sacrifice, the war, the sun, the tape in heaven, all of it, was just the show keeping the promises it made the day it chose to remember. The hard part wasn't the spectacle. Any show can do spectacle. The hard part was the caring, and the show committed to it early and never once flinched, never once traded it back for the easy laugh, and that quiet, stubborn, 8-year-long act of caring underneath a costume of jokes is the smartest thing it ever did. Which leaves me with just one thing left to say to you, the part where I stop laying out what the show did and try, finally, to tell you what I think all of it actually meant. So let's go back to the beginning, to the stupidest little thing in it. Rigby leaning back, full of himself, saying nothing on Earth can stop us, and the spacecraft dropping out of the sky right on cue. The cheapest joke in the show, a guy says nothing can stop us, and a thing falls from the sky and stops them. But sit with it now, at the end, where we know what we know, because that dumb little gag, a thing falling out of the sky to save everyone from themselves, isn't a throwaway. It's a rehearsal. The show was practicing the shape of its own ending in its first minutes and didn't tell anybody, maybe didn't even know it yet, because that's how it really ends. Not with a punchline. With Pops, the gentle pink lollipop man, the softest character in the whole world, the one who thought every day was his birthday, a being older than the universe falling into the sun so everyone else gets to keep living. The thing from the sky, stopping the unstoppable. Once a joke, then the heaviest thing it ever did. So let me answer the question we started with plainly the way you'd want it answered at 2 a.m. Was this secretly one of the most carefully built shows on television? Yes. It only ever looked lazy, and the smartest thing it ever did wasn't a joke or a twist. It was that early, quiet decision to let its characters remember. To let actions cost something. That one choice is the whole thing. It's why a show about 2 guys who never wanted to mow the lawn could end with its gentlest character accepting the heaviest responsibility there is. And have you believe it, the dumb show stopped being dumb the moment it decided to remember. Everything after that was just the bill coming due. And here's the proof. The bookend pulled all the way shut. The first episode is called The Power. The last episode is called The Power. Same title, 8 years apart. That was never a coincidence. The loop was always the point. The show that taught itself to remember made sure its first word and its last word were the same word, so even the structure refuses to forget. So here's the thought I'll leave you with. The soft one to fall asleep to. The very last image, Pops in heaven, watching his friends on a worn-out VHS tape, Bowie's Heroes playing underneath it. A show about remembering, refusing, even at the very end, to forget. He sacrificed everything, and what he does with forever is press play and watch the people he loved. Thank you for staying up this late with me, genuinely. There's something nice about walking slowly through a thing you love with somebody else still awake. If these long, quiet nights are something you want more of, the subscribe button keeps them coming. Sleep well. I'll leave the tape running.